This is FinTech Futures at Sibos, and I'm joined by David Rego of Standard Chartered. David, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us. Just to get started, would you like to give us a quick introduction to yourself and your role in it?
Thank you, Paul. Very happy to be here. My full name, David Rego, Standard Chartered Bank. I'm based out of Singapore. I head our global payments product, which covers all segments, FI, corporate, big, large, small, and our platform also services our retail business as well.
Excellent, excellent. And you're here going to be on a panel discussing ISO 20022, extending the potential benefits along to corporates. For those not in attendance, can you give us a quick rundown of that, some of the key takeaways maybe from that discussion?
Yeah, so we actually had a panel discussion this morning on the topic, and admittedly there is limited uptake at this point in time. There's only about 15% or so of messages that are actually flowing over ISO 20022 standards over the past 6 months. Obviously, we see that picking up. There's challenges, with the community, with banks adopting it and picking that up as well. But on the whole, I would say, as we went through the discussion, it's quite clear that it is an initiative that we need to adopt and drive as a community. We need to also bring in corporates into this journey because they're ultimately the ones who instruct us to pay and then have to have all the statement information back so that they can do the activities they need to do on cash application and stuff like that. Which means we therefore need to now get much more engaged with corporates and their system providers, which is ERPs and TMS providers, because that's the entire community that you need to bring along. So once we get that going, that's when we start getting the rich data in, that's when we get the structured data in, that's when banks benefit from a number of operational efficiencies that they can achieve, much more efficient risk management. But there's also corporate benefits that could be realized because they would get richer data for them to work on, apply funds, etc. Payments become faster because you take friction out of the system with inadequate and faulty data, so payments flow faster. There's less stops in the cycle, and then there's a host of other benefits that come through around compliance control even for corporates. So, for example, we bank a number of NBFIs in a number of markets, and in many of those markets, these NBFIs are required to make sure that the deposits that come into the accounts from their retail clients actually come in from an account that is in the same name as what they have on their record, which today is being done through all type of convoluted, processes because we don't really have those fields, we don't have that level of information in the payment instruction that comes through. So for corporates, it could be that, it could be looking at things around supply chain financing with the, remittance information that's available with the new payment message format. There's things around POBO Robo, so that's payments on behalf, receivables on behalf, because there are dedicated fields again in the ISO 20022 format. So I think for corporates as well, there's significant, benefits to be gained. But it is all going to start with, the banking community, the ERP, TMS providers, and the corporates working together. Up until this point in time, it's probably been just really the banks working on this.
Sure, sure. Excellent. I know in the UK specifically, there's been a lot of movement towards ISO 20022, with November 2025 being almost the end of that coexistence period. How do you think progress has been in terms of transition globally towards that protocol then? And do you think there's enough time left for everybody to get over it?
Yeah, so that's indeed a very fair question, Paul, which also came up this morning. So what we're seeing is, UK is just one of the countries that's gone on to ISO 20022 for high value payments in the country. There's a number of those, there's Australia, Singapore, there's Canada, and the US will happen on chips April of next year, and then in 2025 Fed will also go to ISO 20022. So I think most of the large domestic systems will go on to the ISO 20022 format, which means in some shape and form a number of banks in those countries need to necessarily comply and do it. So we will see more momentum, picking up and more banks doing this. The challenge is on the cross-border side. Are they doing it enough? So in the sense, are banks only solving for this for domestic payments and not looking at it when they do cross-border? which obviously is not what we want. We want the whole payment landscape to be, moving to the ISO 20022 format. So I think there are challenges. I think the timeline is I must say, maybe even looking short, because I know for a fact in Asia, we have quite a few countries and banks from those countries that are not necessarily doing it. They're using things like translators and, other stopgap arrangements to make this happen. So we're seeing progress, but I think it really needs to pick up in order to meet the 25 timeline for cross-border. I think on the domestic side, we clearly see all banks having to play ball and do that because that's their local regulator and they need to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, on that front as well, I mean, what does the shift over to ISO 20022 mean for cross-border payments, do you think, going forward?
As I stated at the outset, I think there's the benefits are significant. What we also see is benefits that can come from a number of our corporate clients, large and small, are moving to digital commerce business models. With something like ISO 20022, which gives you a standard that can, work for cross-border payments, and, number of these corporations and even small, medium enterprises are trading cross-border. If you have a format that allows you to plug into your e-commerce platform, the payments format as well, it gives you, many more efficiencies that you can gain from connecting that commercial transaction information from the e-commerce platform, sucking that up, putting it onto a payment message, and then sending that out. And the ISO 20022 format, allows for different syntax like XML, JSON, and the like. So I think there are some serious benefits to be gained, as you go further down the road, from people who early adopt and look at this and bank with the banks that are doing this as well on a basis. So that whole cross-border commerce flow happening in the digital realm can really benefit from something like this.
Excellent. And looking at payments more in general terms, I mean, what are some of the key trends that you've noticed in digital payments at the moment?
I think the whole digital commerce thing is post-pandemic, it's very clear that more and more corporations are going to be moving their workflows for buying and selling online. It's tended to be predominantly domestic flows, but we now going to see the cross-border flows, like I mentioned. That's one bit. Digital payments is, been around, for example, in Asia very long, where, there's e-wallets and the like, where people, either pay or collect into an e-wallet. So we see more of that happening. There's obviously a lot of discussion on doing payments through distributed ledger technology on the blockchain. You've also got then the whole CBDC engagements that are going on in multiple countries, which are in some cases already live domestic, but then extending to cross-border as well. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot that's in pilot stage, but as a bank that is operating in many, many markets, we need to be engaged and making sure that we are relevant to our clients, and therefore, staying close to many of these programs of work that are ongoing. And taking the lead from, how does it really solve for a client's need?
Right. And you mentioned DLT there. I mean, payments tokenization has been getting a lot of traction as well recently in the headlines. I mean, what's your take on that as well? Do you see that getting a bit more?
Yeah, so I think at this point in time, Paul, it seems to be, a multiple sets of, closed loop type systems that are running on these tokens. And I think getting it to be more open is where the real challenge is. I think the regulations are still developing around that, so that's obviously going to take some time to firm up. As I mentioned, the CBDC, again, the central bank digital currencies, again, the similar tokenized payment platform. How is that going to shape up? Has that really just stayed domestic, cross-border? So I think it's really the use cases are there, but I think people are struggling on how you actually manage that liquidity in an open ecosystem. Whereas right now it tends to be largely, a single bank or a single firm that allows you to do, those payments on a tokenized basis. But it is just restricted to that closed ecosystem. But that's where, the work we're doing with Partio or the work we're doing with the central banks around, digital currencies, I think eventually will lead to something which creates that open ecosystem. Maybe if not entirely global, certainly on a regional basis, there is every chance of that happening.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, given the rapid pace of change with digitalization, but, new use cases coming along, new companies popping up, how difficult is it for banks of all sizes to keep up with that rate of change and make sure that you're constantly at the cutting edge, I guess, of the technology when it comes to payments or anything else?
We are challenged, like most other banks, with a lot of spend on actually regulatory upgrades that we need to do. So that is clearly a big part of our investment dollars goes towards that. But I think the important thing, Paul, is around picking the use cases you want to go after, because there's lots of bright, shiny ideas that come out, ever so often. It's really picking the ones that you can take with a client and that you can scale with many more clients, or that you are going to do with a client that you believe has that scale to create the value that you've put into the investment to create that use case for them. So I think banks need to be selective around that. As much as I said previously, we need to engage in the things like CBDCs and those type of regulatory engagements. When it comes to certain use cases, we need to be far more precise around the ones we want to go after. And there is only limited investment dollars that every organization has, so we need to work through that.
Excellent, excellent. And just to finish off then, I mean, how do you see the payment space evolving in the near-term future then? Is there anything else that you've got at Standard Chartered that you can tell us about in the pipeline?
We're working on a few things. Partio is one of them. We're also working on a solution we call Payouts as a Service, which in the e-commerce space allows us to split payments based on rules, where if a commercial transaction has happened and there's different parties involved, there's the buyer-seller, there may be a delivery agent, there may be an insurance agent, there may be other parties in the chain. Once the money is collected from the buyer, how do you split that out on a rules-based engine, and then pay that out to the different parties involved, pay that out at a frequency that is relevant for each of them, or a payment type that is relevant for each of them. So we have an offering that's now live in 5 markets called Payouts as a Service, which really allows our clients to achieve that efficiency and doesn't require them to create all that code and programming and operations work on their side, because they kind of just set up the rules for the parties involved in the commercial transaction.
Sure.
And once that's set up, then we just do all the work for them. So that's one of the issues. There's a few others that we're working on, but this one I believe is going to be quite powerful from the whole digital commerce space.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, David, for taking the time out to speak.
My
It's
pleasure.
been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.